Well, it is amazing. Athletes have always, like I said, been very religious, and football in particular, with a lot of the subculture being in the South in a really influential way. It's always been a very Christian influenced subculture in sports in general and but I don't know if I've ever seen anything to the degree we've been seeing it in a bold, uncompromising. And it's not just, I thank God got me here. My
Yeah.
faith is important. It's specific. It's about Jesus. And one of the Boise State players, there's this interview after they got knocked out of the playoffs. He turned to the coach and he said, Coach, you saved my life because you introduced me to Jesus. And he's crying and he says, Jesus is the real hero. None of us are the real hero. I mean, it's explicit, it's gospel, it's Jesus. It's exciting to see how bold these believers are being after a long time, I think, of increasing timidity among Christians because we're feeling this growing opposition to what we believe. But I love it. Christians are being associated with just political parties and views and certain ethical things. But this is giving athletes the ability to just say, Jesus is everything to me.
Yeah.
And yes, I love my sport, but that's not what my life is about. And some of these kids are 18, 19, 20, leading the way in that
Yeah.
sort of bold proclamation. I'm thrilled about it. I mean, there was a time.
Welcome to Conversations with Tyndale House Scholars in America, a podcast spotlighting the kingdom impact that scholars from Tyndale House bring to the United States. In this episode, we welcome Dr. Erik Thoennes, a leading voice on the role of sport, play, and competition in the Christian life. Is competition compatible with Christian virtue? How do practices of play shape our spiritual formation and witness in a performance-driven culture? This thoughtful and engaging dialogue may challenge your assumptions and perhaps even put a skip in your step. Let's listen in now.
Welcome to Conversations with Tyndale House Scholars in America, where we explore the role of how scholars from Tyndale House in Cambridge, England, influence and strengthen the church in the United States. Today, we welcome Dr. Erik Thoennes, Professor of Theology, Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. Erik is also pastor at Grace Evangelical Free Church in La Mirada, California, where he preaches on the preaching staff there. So we'll link to Erik's website, articles, and books in the show notes. I'm Ken Magnuson, Executive Director of the Evangelical Theological Society and a member of the Board of American Friends of Tyndale House. And one of the things that makes Tyndale House very special is the serendipitous gospel friendships that are formed there and the opportunity to engage with other evangelical scholars. And my family met Erik and his sweet wife, Donna, while we were on sabbatical at Tyndale House, and they have been dear friends through the years. I appreciate so much Erik's love for the Lord, for the church, for his wife and family and his students, and his joy in life. And I'm so glad that you've tuned in. Welcome, Erik, to Conversations with Tyndale House Scholars in America.
Thanks, Ken. It's great to talk with you.
Glad you're here. All right, so you've explored play and sport in the Christian life extensively. What led you to this topic, and why do you see it as so valuable? And maybe before you answer this, because I don't think you'll say this, but I'll say that Erik in his prime was an elite athlete. So he's coming from experience and theological reflection.
Well, my interest in it is really for two primary reasons. The first one is I came from a very challenging upbringing, and going to the park and playing, especially sports, was an incredibly important part of my life as a kid. It just helped me get away from challenging situations at home, and that's exactly what it felt like. I felt like I was going far away from home into another world when I would go and play. And the park was only a 10-minute walk from my house, but it felt like a world away. So there was a therapeutic element to it. I wasn't even aware of it at the time. It just was what I was doing as a kid. But looking back on it, it gave me perspective. It gave me the ability to disconnect from difficult situations. And because I had a rough life, I just had a lack of social acceptance a lot of times. And I think it was about fifth grade, I realized that I had athletic ability. And so I really started to lean into that. And I remember the first time social acceptance came my way. I was in a kickball game in fifth grade in this blacktop playground we would have recess in at my elementary school. And I remember the first time experiencing social affirmation. So, in many ways, sport was a lifesaver for me as a kid. The other thing is because it had become so important to me in my life, I recognized the tendency for it to become idolatry and far too important and far too significant in my identity. And I realized that through the history of the church, we haven't done a very good job in viewing things like sport and play and competition. Either we've gone to the extreme of there should be no place for it, it's frivolous, and a lot of the Puritans would have viewed it that way, or it just becomes as idolatrous as it is for people in the world. And so I really wanted to figure out a Christian view of something that tended to either be dismissed as irrelevant and frivolous or become overly important and find that middle ground as a means to glorifying God and enjoying Him and not turning it into something ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that as in your experience, sport can be an escape and something of a healing place for a lot of people. And so you shared how sports saved you and gave you a sense of affirmation. And question, how do you help athletes avoid tying their identity to sports achievements? Like you talked about, that threat, and especially knowing that such success is temporary. And I think we see athletes who come to the end of their career, and where are they?
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with Tom Brady. I think it was his fourth or fifth Super Bowl win and MVP, and he had achieved everything you could possibly achieve in football. And he's married to a supermodel, he's a billionaire, and I remember him saying, I just keep feeling that this can't be all there is. There's got to be more than this. And so you think, here's a guy who's attained everything the world offers, and he's still left feeling empty.
Hmm.
And it's just not what he thought it would be when he finally arrives. And so a lot of athletes have discovered that. And because of the curse, all athletes experience that at some point, sooner rather than later, usually than they expect. And so I just heard Boise State's head football coach talking about this because he's taking some criticism for how overtly he's proclaiming his faith and leading his players to Christ at Boise State. And he just said, look, I know there's got to be more than football for these players of mine. And so I want them to know that. And although I welcome and love non-Christians here on the team, for me, that thing is Jesus. And so I want them to know that football is not the most important thing. And I just love that mentality. And it is so easy to get yourself wrapped up in your identity that comes from athletic accomplishments. And I remember hearing years ago that men in particular first find their identity on the ball field and then in the bedroom and then in the boardroom.
Hmm.
So they move from, athletics to being sexually prolific to successful in business, and you derive your identity from these things. And that's just a deadly way to derive your identity. We all know how fragile and frail and fickle those things are. And so it's so important to enjoy the gift of sport and athletic ability, but at the same time, never ground your identity in that or your ultimate happiness in that. And what's interesting is athletes per capita are far more religious than non-athletes.
Hmm.
And I'm sure the reason is athletes are daily confronted with their own limitations. Most people never get to the absolute max of anything they can do in a typical day. Athletes do over and over again. You can't run one more sprint, you can't do one more rep. And that's how you train. You train to max. And
Mm.
if you're not doing that, if you're not getting to the end of your ability, you're not training hard. And so that shows your limitations. And athletes also realize that everything they've been working for years could all go with one Achilles.
Mm.
And so there's a fragility to it that athletes recognize. What's interesting is they're far more religious. For a lot of them, it's superstition. It's like a rabbit's foot. It's not real relationship with the Lord. But they can also be some of the most arrogant people on the planet because they compare themselves to normal
Yeah,
humans
yeah,
and as elite athletes feel better. And so it should be the most humbling thing to get to the end of your abilities every day. But often, you get arrogant because you compare yourself.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, and this is off script just a little bit, but um, you mentioned the coach of Boise State, and we saw a lot in the last few months or year of this kind of thing, haven't we? With at athletes preaching the gospel and sharing Christ with their teammates and baptizing and doing basically, some campus-wide revival-like meetings. What's your take on that?
Well, it is amazing. Athletes have always, like I said, been very religious, in football in particular,
Mm.
with a lot of the subculture being in the South in a really influential way. It's always been a very Christian influenced subculture in sports in general and but I don't know if I've ever seen anything to the degree we've been seeing it in a bold, uncompromising. And it's not just, I thank God got me here. My
Yeah.
faith is important. It's specific. It's about Jesus. And one of the Boise State players, there's this interview after they got knocked out of the playoffs. He turned to the coach and he said, Coach, you saved my life because you introduced me to Jesus. And he's crying and he says, Jesus is the real hero. None of us are the real hero. I mean, it's explicit, it's gospel, it's Jesus. It's exciting to see how bold these believers are being after a long time, I think, of increasing timidity among Christians because we're feeling this growing opposition to what we believe. But I love it. Christians are being associated with just political parties and views and certain ethical things. But this is giving athletes the ability to just say, Jesus is everything to me.
Yeah.
And yes, I love my sport, but that's not what my life is about. And some of these kids are 18, 19, 20, leading the way in that
Yeah.
sort of bold proclamation. I'm thrilled about it. I mean, there was a time Tim Tebow stuck out like crazy
Yeah.
because he take a knee in the end zone. Ohio State's team this past year, they were setting the bar for bold proclamation of Christ in amazing ways. And so I love seeing it.
Yeah.
And it's not contrived, it's not packaged, it's just honest. It's just beautiful. I'm
Yeah.
thrilled.
Yeah. Yeah. And one
I'll
of the
never forget. I've shown the picture of your daughter Hannah when she was in the Olympic trials or some high level competition, pointing to the heavens that I saw her do as a little girl. And to see her take her elite athleticism as an opportunity to preach Christ, and not just with words, but with a joy and with an enjoyment of the gifts God's given you. Because if you just rush to, oh, I'm going to be evangelistic about this without being committed to what you're doing, it's hollow.
yeah.
So when you're maxing out on stewarding the gifts God's given you, and then on top of that, you bring your Christian witness into it, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. 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 That's great. Well said. So another aspect of this is many young athletes play high school sports, club sports, and it requires huge sacrifices from their families in terms of time, travel, finances, and often sports increasingly creates a conflict with church commitments. So how do you view this pursuit of sports, possibly for scholarship and success, with its impact on faith and family life, and how do we find the balance there?
Yeah, I grieve over how much sports has changed even since you and I were kids.
Mm,
It was typical to play several sports.
yeah.
Three sport athletes were not an uncommon thing in high school, and now it's a year round. It's way out of control,
Mm,
and there's this professional mentality, and it's a huge investment even of time and travel and finances, and I think something pretty drastic has to happen to right things, even at the college level with NILs and the transfer portal now, and students are choosing to stay in school rather than go to the professional level because there's the potential of making more money at that level. So it's getting to the point where I don't even enjoy the whole thing anymore. I'd rather go to a decent high school football game than go to an NFL game. I'd rather see some kids who are still playing for the joy of it do that. And especially Christians need to lead the way in saying we're not going to get caught up in this. I don't even think it's the best thing for you athletically
mm,
using one primary set of muscles
yeah.
year round. There's something good for you mentally and physically to be changing a sport now and then and taking long periods of time off and going on family vacations without losing your spot. And so the financial aspects of it, parents are often the worst. They lead the way in the intensity and the obsessiveness of it, and you lose the joy of it. Hey, a player who just she played her last game at TCU. I heard her interviewed, and it was her third school. Actually, she went to Louisville, where your daughter went, and she just finished her time at TCU. And apparently, the coach at TCU was tremendously helpful in her able to enabling her to find her identity not in basketball.
Mm,
I think in Christ, is she wasn't super overt about it, but I just think we need to rebel against the way things are and just not play that game and and make it fun and enjoyable, not losing the competitive edge. I think competition can be a wonderful thing, but it's so out of control, and so many parents and coaches have their own identities wrapped up in the success of their athletes
mm,
that it destroys the joy of it. And
yeah.
so I'm just very concerned about what it's become.
Yeah. Yeah. I recall helping to coach a baseball team with I think it was 9 and 10 year olds, maybe 11 and 12 year olds, and this kid on the team was a pretty good pitcher. And after every pitch, he'd look into the stands at his dad for approval, and it was like, wow, how do we? Yeah. So I completely agree with what you're getting at there, and um, this is kind of related, but if play is God's one of God's great gifts for coping with life in a fallen world. How do we balance that? Not only what you've just been talking about, but balancing it with other kinds of pursuits, academics, professional pursuits, and just um, something like the joy of reading and learning and things like that.
Well, I think we need to allow for a lot of freedom for individuals to decide uh, if that's going to play, or if sports or play or competition are going to play a role in your life and to what degree. I think we all need some kind of play and recreation in our lives, especially if we're diligent and hardworking people. Play and recreation is meaningful because you've worked hard.
Hmm.
If that's all you do, if you live to play, I don't know if you've ever heard the sort of famous quote that Americans in particular, we we worship our work, we work at our play, and we play at our worship.
Hmm.
And we've really got to fix that problem. I think there's a lot to that. But some people, they live for the weekend, they live for playing, and it can't be that to us. But I do think as that helpful diversion, as that helpful time of rest and taking a deep breath and getting perspective, play can be a wonderful thing. It doesn't have to be sport either. It can be board games. It can be chess. It can be just something that has a non-utilitarian, non-pragmatic, non-results oriented, creativity and fun. We've
Mm,
got to have that. And I think that's important to infuse in all of life. So even I think as a dad, I want to be playful as we're cleaning up after dinner and
mm,
shoot my kids with the water as I'm doing dishes and just an unexpected playfulness to life where we have fun together and we're serious about what really matters. We're serious as you can be about God and his kingdom, but we realize he's sovereign. So we're able to rest in his sovereignty. And as one author I read said that in light of God's sovereignty, everything we do should be viewed as children at play.
mm.
And so to have that childlike restfulness in God should lead us to a playfulness in life. Even having fun in conversation that's playful or and so I just think playfulness in general and then actual play should be something we incorporate in our lives on a regular basis.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. And this probably relates to that in that you've said somewhere when play is grounded in the hope of the gospel, it can become one of life's greatest and most encouraging pleasures. So, how explain how you'd say we can ground play in the hope of the gospel?
Well, I do think it has to start, a right view of play has to start with an intense seriousness about life in a fallen world where judgment day is coming, God is holy, our sin is devastating. And so, I mean, the Bible's mostly serious.
Hmm.
I do think there's play woven through it. Even Bible talks about God playing with Leviathan as an expression of how awesome he is. And so just the playfulness in creation itself with a platypus and a kangaroo and daisies, billions of daisies that God makes. I love the intelligent design movement that you're brilliant about, but at the same time, there's an extravagance and a playfulness in creation that's just as impressive to me as the design of it.
Hmm.
It seems like God goes overboard with tulips, right? Do you really need that many tulips, Lord?
Right.
It's not just about design. It's about extravagant beauty and playfulness and almost going over the top with all the extravagance that he's blessed us with. And so I think taking God very seriously, but to the point where our security that comes through our relationship with Jesus that he provides it needs to anchor our lives to the point where we feel almost a reckless abandon in going through life, knowing our future, our eternity is secure.
Hmm.
And so we should be able to be people who laugh deeply and sing at the top of our lungs and still skip occasionally. Do you even remember how to skip, Ken? Did you? I saw somebody ask an old man to skip online the other day, and it's like he had no idea even how to begin to do it again. You know, he did as a little
Yeah.
boy, but we forget these things. And
Yeah.
so I think taking God as seriously as we should actually should lead to a kind of joyful exuberance that is a childlike playfulness in our lives that should lead to something very attractive to the world that
Yeah.
doesn't have the hope that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I think I remember how to skip and could probably do it, but it might not look pretty.
Oh,
It
it's not about looking pretty.
it wouldn't look like a child skipping, but yeah, and I appreciate your mention of Leviathan because I often think about that with animals and just kind of they're just being themselves and they can be silly and my family has had Boston Terriers and they're just a silly dog, and it gives me delight to see the way that God has created them.
Oh, it is amazing how animals put us to shame in their ability to play. And like our golden retriever, when he sees us get the leash, he starts spinning in circles. And then you let him out in the front yard and he gets what we call the zoomies, where I mean, he could have been an amazing running back with some of the moves he makes. And he'll even mess with it where he'll get down and he'll like, let's go. And it really is inspirational when you see animals who understand that. So even when they will fight with each other, they understand so perfectly, biting the ear. So it's a bite, but it doesn't hurt, right? But
Yeah.
so that just that amazing ability to even play in a way that's rough, that doesn't go too far. It's a kind of intelligence that's astounding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
animals, they do often put us to shame in that, and that's why it's good to have them around. I say to my students, if you've lost a childlike wonder in the world, do whatever it takes to recapture it.
Mm.
And I say, buy a kitten or spend time with kids or do something to rejuvenate a childlike wonder in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. One of the things I really like about your reflections on play is how you highlight the paradox of play, how it thrives on uncertainty, but also seeks resolution. And so, how does this tension mirror the broader human experience and even our longing for ultimate resolution in
Uh,
Christ?
yeah, I love it. Right. So on the way home, we're on a journey, and the journey involves all sorts of detours that we didn't expect and delights that we didn't know were around the corner that we're seeing. And so I think thinking about just incorporating play into our lives on a daily basis helps us with the bigger picture of the journey we're on because we are heading home. The Shire awaits. And that's a sure thing, but there are many dangers, toils, and snares along the way. And so to even see the challenges of life as an opportunity to creatively engage them with hope and joy is incredibly important for us. That doesn't minimize the brutality of life in a fallen world, but it does put it in perspective. I think it's fascinating that humor has very similar aspects to it. Uh, I've written on humor as well, and there's a lot of overlap there. And one of the articles I wrote on it is called Laughing Through Tears, the redemptive role of humor in a fallen world. And I point out that it's no coincidence that Jewish people and African Americans dominate the comedy industry.
Mm,
It's because they've suffered so
mm,
much. And there's something about humor, there's something about play that helps us cope with the difficulties of life in a way that is an amazing gift from God.
mm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, this has been great. So I don't want to let you go before asking you a little bit about Tyndale House. So tell us about your time at Tyndale House. What did you study when you were there? What was your experience like?
It was a wonderful time just being in Cambridge and walking by Isaac Newton's office. and
Oh,
yeah, it was just amazing to be in Cambridge, right in the heart of Cambridge where it is. So just being there was a wonderful experience. But I would say, without a doubt, as helpful as it was to be there in the library, being able to focus and do research and study and writing the way we were. My wife was there as well during our sabbatical, and she was working on a project on the emotions of Paul, the ones he experienced and encouraged, that was just so formative for us.
mm,
But it was the people. It was the Magnussons. It really was. We got to know John and Noelle Piper during that time and their amazing daughter Talitha. And so we just had people who we were there with during that time that became dear lifelong friends.
mm,
And 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 the luxury of being able to devote so much time to going deeper in important ideas, but then taking breaks and sharing with each other what we were working on and getting to know each other well beyond just our research projects. That was by far the highlight, to be with a community of believers who were going deeper in really important areas, and to have discussions, debates, conversations, and develop relationships over coffee and dinner. With that was the highlight.
Yeah, yeah. It's at any given time, you not only have the academic resources there in books and journals and things like that, but you're likely to have an expert on a topic that you can just go and talk to, and it's an amazing opportunity. But so I'm in full agreement. Well, this has been great, Erik. Thank you for your reflections, and I just think it's so great to have in a depth of theological reflection on play and sport and humor. And so we appreciate you sharing with us today.
You're welcome, Ken. Great talking to you, brother.
You too.
My name's Peter Williams, Principal of Tyndale House in Cambridge. Thank you very much for watching this video of conversations with Tyndale House scholars in America. And thank you also for sharing this, because sharing a video like this helps spread the impact. Tyndale House exists to raise up Bible scholars who are servant-hearted and who are looking to help the church globally. So if you can like this or share it with others, that would be very helpful. Thank you also for your support of Tyndale House, and do visit the website friendsoftyndalehouse.com. Thank you.